Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to everyone to join for this first webinar of a series that we would like to organize on a regular basis, involving potentially some customers and some companies who have transformed their business. We are going to talk today about what we think are the most trendy business transformation that we've seen in the industry. And I know that it may be frustrating that you don't have the possibility to interact a lot today, but there's a good news is that we are actually launching this as a series of webinar that will populate something that we have just created that we call the Business Model Champions Community. So what is it? It's a possibility for you as business leader to join a group who are genuinely passionate about business model. It's completely free to attend. And in order to be part of this community, you can simply go into the Lemon Operations website, and then you can just enter your email, and then immediately you are part of the community. And as part of the welcome email, you will also receive an invitation, if you want, to join the Discord community. Discord is a tool where we can interact. It's a bit like Slack. It's very well known in the gaming industry, but that's a possibility for you and us to engage, to share, to have some more conversation, to talk about the business, to exchange between each other, and to share some ideas. The idea of this community is to make it valuable for everyone. So the main goal of this community is to make sure that we are not going to take this as an opportunity to sell services, but more to ask questions about business model, about go-to-market, about operations, about basically how we can improve the way we drive the business. So it would be great if you are joining us into this community. You will probably find that in part of the members of the Discord community, some members are in blue, and the reason why they are in blue is simply because they are part of Lemon Operations, so they can also help you in interacting with us and answering any kind of question. Right, so it's a free service that we wanted to make available for you to join and to exchange on business model. Now, this said, let's talk about the core topic of today, which is the business model transformation that we've seen in the last years. So let me first explain how we have captured those data and those trends and how we made the selection. So at Lemon Operations, we have worked in the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years with about almost 5,000 companies in order to assist these companies in the transformation of their business model. And I want to take the opportunity to thank all our business makers who have contributed to this work, who have been working very hardly with customers in order to create those amazing success all around the world in 79 countries. Now, the thing is that over the last years, we've been essentially focused on the IT industry. So essentially, resellers, retailers, ISVs, distributors, and of course, IT vendors with whom we have worked with in order to help the transformation of their business. Increasingly, we have worked in the last maybe 2 to 3 years with companies out of the IT industry who have faced the same challenge that they need to transform their business model, very likely to what has been done in the IT industry. And this is why this portion of business, even though it is increasing, but still stays a minor part of what we've been dealing with. So don't be surprised if through this webinar, we are going to talk about some of the things that we've seen in the IT industry, but we see also coming in other industries. So that's why we believe it's of value for everyone. This is also to highlight that we are not a research company. So the work that we are going to share here is not a report of very scientific research. It's just the feedback and the report that we've got from our business maker working with all of this company to reflect those trends of what is happening right now. Before we start in the core topic, I would like to highlight some of the things that we have observed in the last year. The number one thing that we've seen is that the world is increasingly flat. What do we mean by that? Is that 20 or 30 years ago, when we used to work with companies and in the industry in the transformation of business model or whatsoever, it was obvious that there was some kind of maturity gap depending on the countries and depending on the continents. So for instance, we would say that US was ahead of the game, and then a number of countries in EMEA and in Asia, and then maybe the rest of the world. This is not anymore true. What we see right now across all the countries that we have the chance to work with is that the level of maturity with respect to the business transformation is almost the same everywhere. And you'd be surprised to see some of the amazing things that we've been working in Bangladesh or in Kenya or in some of the countries where the infrastructure was missing so much in the past, but now there's been such a gap that has been closed so that all these countries can get access to the same level of business maturity. And actually, you'd be surprised to see some of the things that are coming from all these countries. Think about one thing, like in Kenya, for instance, they are way ahead in terms of mobile payment that many countries in the western side of the world, simply because they have sort of skip a step, which was credit cards. So they didn't have credit cards, so they went straight into mobile phone payment, while in Western Europe, we still have a bit of hard time to impose that as a way of payment. Then the other thing as well that we have noticed is that there used to be a sort of a line between B2B and B2C, and we see right now that this line is blurring. The behavior of purchasers in the IT, in the B2B and in the B2C tend to become very, very similar. And this is also a lesson on how we are going to drive our business. That maybe we need to find a source of inspiration from the B2C to somewhat develop it in the B2B and vice versa. And across very similar industry, we see a great diversity of business model everywhere. So we are living in a new world where business models are changing, where we have a proliferation of new business model, and out of that, we have tried to retain about 7 trends. Now, let me, before we go into those 7 trends, let me highlight one thing, which is actually an outcome from the research of Forrester. 76% of CEOs across all industries are thinking that their current business model will be unrecognizable within 5 years. They all think subscription, recurring revenues, etc. 76%. This is not a minor impact. And yesterday, I was also in a big event driven by Autodesk at worldwide level, and we see that the name of the game is about change. Everybody is thinking about how we are going to change the way we do business with our customers. And out of this, we try to identify what are the key drivers of those change. Number one driver is definitely customer traction. I mean by that, that all of those companies are thinking of changing their business model because they believe that customers are expecting something else. It is not that customer has expected or expressed a new way of buying things, because many times they don't, but it's simply the fact that there is a belief that customer will buy in a different way in the future. So this is the definition of innovation by the fact that we are anticipating something that customers have not yet expressed, but we believe it's going to be a major behavior for the customer. Customer traction is definitely the number one driver of all of these changes. The second driver, and it's probably not a big surprise to all of you, is the research for a resilient business model. Of course, it's not surprising because it comes after 2 years of pandemic and 1.5 years of economic downturn. People are expecting to find what kind of business model can help me to get protected for all of these ups and downs that we see in the industry. And obviously, when you look at resilient business models such as a service, there's good reason for companies to think that in the future they may want to go into these directions because they feel they will be protected. The third driver, obviously, is a search for increasing financial performance. And when we say so, it's of course profit, it's of course incremental revenues, but that's also valuation of the company. Think about this, that when you are shifting from a transactional business model to a recurring business model, the valuation of the company is going to be multiplied by 4. So there's very good reason why people are going to go into this direction. Then the next one is, of course, what we would call the global concerns. And when I'm talking about global concerns, we talk essentially about climate change and social concerns that we have and that are impacting all the world. Now, what does it have to do with business model? How can we solve something like that? In one of the trends, we will see that actually there is an increase willing to from business leader to try to develop a business model that is not only good for the company but is also good for the environment. And we will see how we are able to achieve that. Then another trend, obviously, is the speed of innovation. And because the speed of innovation is not going to slow down, as we've seen lately, then people are looking for a business model where they can land those new innovation in a much faster way. And then last but not least, there is also all the constraints that companies have to get through in terms of operations, for instance, that requires maybe a new approach to their business in order to unleash their capacity to grow. So let's go into each of them right now and to see how it is impacting the business. The first one is how companies are shifting business model on the way to customer centricity. And we have divided business model like in 5 categories. The first one is a transactional business model, which is probably the most prevailing business model today. I'm buying a good or I'm producing a good and then I'm selling that good and it's a one-off sale. That's probably the most common way of driving the business. That's the first one. The second one is a value-added service business, so that I'm buying good, or I'm selling something, but obviously my goal is not necessarily to make a lot of profit on what I'm selling, but it's more making the profit on the services that is around what I'm selling. And this is, of course, a very, very important trend in the B2B industry in how we are developing the profit and the margin. Both business model are one-off business model. It means that it's not recurring. We start to have a recurring business model when we think about managed services. We know very well managed services when we are in the IT industry, but it's not only the IT industry, it is also the utility industry, the telco industry. A lot of industries have a way of managing the service on behalf of the customer and creating a recurring relationship with those customers. Now, there's a next one, which is the business as a service. And business as a service, the difference between managed services and business as a service is that managed services is still somewhat tailored to the customer. We are building what we call a service level agreement with the customer, and then we are building something specifically for that customer. While in business as a service, we are creating something that is somewhat repeatable across a very large number of customers. It's the same offer that we are proposing to as many customers as we can. And then the fifth one is what we call the next gen. And the next gen somewhat is still to be invented, but we start to see the profile of a new, or let's say the emergence of new business model that we will talk about later in this trend. So when we see all of these different type of business model, and by the way, when you are becoming a member of the business champion community, or business model champion community, you will receive a document which is defining all of these different business model with a great deal of details so that you can see what differs, what works in one, what are the key factors of success in all of these different business model. But the one thing that I would like to highlight here is that sometimes we are overstating the fact that from one it's non-recurring and someone it's recurring. There is, in our opinion, something that is more important than the other, which is how we are shifting away from a product-centric approach to have a customer-centric approach. When we were preparing this webinar, we had some chat on the web with a number of people, and some of them may be on this call, and one of them say, I expect you to talk not only about the great success, but also about the great failure. Yes, we are going to talk about great failures as well. And one of them, in our opinion, is what is happening right now with device as a service. So let me explain what is device as a service. Device as a service is something that has been pushed inside the IT industry to promote the possibility for buyers to, instead of buying PCs, to somewhat subscribe to PCs. And by this, they would pay that's a monthly fee to get access to a device. And the whole industry was very excited about this possibility of shifting to this device as a service. IDC and Gartner were even predicting that today, actually in 2024, 2025, about 30% of the device would be purchased this way. It did not materialize. And why it did not materialize? Because when people have started to think about device as a service, they were focusing on how do we make that business recurring. And it was obvious that it was the goal. Everyone who wanted to develop this device as a service were focusing about how do I make a lease in order to help my customer buy my PC as a service. But what happened with the customer? When they have seen the possibility of buying the PC as a service, they've been looking at it, definitely. But finally, they didn't want to have it. And why? Because they've made the comparison with buying a PC. And when they make the calculation, like buying a PC and 3 years or even 5 years of device as a service, they found out that device as a service was much more expensive for not that much added value. So again, we have confused the idea of building a recurring business to build something that is actually more customer centric. If we would have taken, and it's not too late, hopefully, but if we have taken like device as a service and make it like customer centric, the idea is not anymore about the device, but it's about the user. And the whole question is that how can we build a service that can make the user more productive? That's the key question. And then what are we defining in order to make that user more productive? And that's all the services potentially inside application, all the service around that, all the training, etc., that we could offer. And all of this could have been a package being sold as a service, but that could demonstrate how we are helping user becoming more productive. Unfortunately, this is not the thing that this is not the way the industry has taken it so far. But hopefully, and we probably see that in some of the top vendors, they are thinking about this, and hopefully they are going to make it a success in the future. One thing that I would like to highlight in the job that we've done in the last years is that 90% of the business model evolution that we've done were done by incrementation rather than by transformation. What does it mean? It means simply that when we are approaching a company to transform his business, the fact that this company is really going to transform the core of the business is really more the exception than the rule. Think of Adobe. When Adobe has decided to shift from pure revenue to let's say software selling to subscription, they have shifted their business overnight to become as a service. But again, it's more the exception than the rule. Most of the businesses, what they are doing is that they are building almost a separated business unit where they are trying a new business model. And then they see how it works. And eventually, what's going to happen is that the new business model is going to be prevailing. And maybe they will give up with the previous one, that is the more traditional one, to go after the new business model. When Netflix has started the business, they approached Blockbuster, who was at the time the leader in the United States, and they have asked Blockbuster whether they would be okay to buy Netflix. And Blockbuster finally has declined that offer. But it's too bad for the reasons you probably know. But not only because of that, but because they could have for some time developed the two business models in parallel. One was more the traditional renting and shipping, and on the same time, they could have evolved with a new business model. And that's exactly the process that many companies are looking after right now, is that they are trying to figure out not necessarily to transform completely their business model, but they are trying to build that as an increment to their existing business. The second thing as well, which is almost something that is connected with something that we're going to say a bit later, is that we see a lot of hybridization of business model. What we mean by that is that some of the companies don't think of business model as a religion. They are going after a business model for a given purpose, for something that they want to reach. And sometimes it involves having a mix of business model within the same business. If you take Amazon, for instance, Amazon, they have their Amazon Prime, that is a subscription, but through Amazon Prime, you could buy any kind of goods that you buy on the transaction mode. So the idea is not to think of business model as a religion, but is really to think about why you want to do it. And again, I want to highlight that because no later than this week, we've seen a lot of companies pushing partners or IT partners to become MSP. Like it's the sort of the ultimate state is to become an MSP. But actually, maybe MSP is not the ultimate state, by the way, of business model. But not only that, I think sometimes we just think that that's the way to go because everybody says so, as opposed to think exactly or what is the purpose that you're looking for that requires to become an MSP or anything else in order to grow in a specific industry. And by the way, very, very transactional models are also successful. Still, we see right now the evolution of business model getting through this product-centric approach. So that was number one. Number two, we have changed time, and that's probably something that we've seen everywhere in the world, that over the last 30 years, we were living in a world where there was massive unemployment. But nowadays, this is changing. Actually, the world that we are shifting into is a world of job scarcity, of talent scarcity. And I know that at the time we are talking, that may be a bit moderated or let's say mitigated by the fact that over the last year, in some industries like the IT industry, there's been massive layoff, right? For the IT industry alone, there's been like 700,000 people laid off for the IT industry alone. So, of course, when we talk about the fact that there's no unemployment, this may not be very true for some of the people that are still looking for a job right now. But in general, apart from this trend, and the trend moving forward is not going to get any better for that, we are shifting into a world of talent scarcity. And this is very obvious in different type of industries, in different type of business. And if we look inside the IT industry, for instance, there's as many job offers for cybersecurity specialists than there are actually cybersecurity specialists active today. And the same applies for artificial intelligence and data management and everything, and data scientists as well. But it's not only that, it is all the people that are driving those business where we miss the talent of those people. And that's a problem. Why it is a problem? Because this talent scarcity becomes the number one impediment to grow. It means that you could have a great business, you could have a lot of possibilities, but you are not able to get after all of these possibilities because you don't have enough talent in order to go after them. Therefore, we need to think differently about how we are operating. And this is where a new ratio is becoming maybe something increasingly important for business leader. We call this the labor intensity ratio. Labor intensity ratio. LIA, we could say, and we can split it in two categories, the LIA C and the LIA V. So what is this? The layer C is the number of internal and external resources dedicated to the, let's say, the running of a product divided by the number of customers. So that's the number of internal and external resources. And it is important to think about not only the internal resources, because if we would like to solve the problem that we have with internal resources, by, for instance, gifting after a channel, we are not really solving the problem. We are just moving the problem. But we are not solving it because we are just moving it to somebody else, but the problems remain itself. And the same applies for the layer V, which is the same ratio, except that instead of number of customer, we talk about dollar generated. And we know that some industries have a very high layer C, like over one. So that means if you look, for instance, consulting companies, take a company like Accenture. Accenture, they have 700,000 employees around the world to serve 9,000 customers, right? So 9,000 customers and 700,000 employees. So that means that on average, Accenture is providing about 80 employees per customer that they are serving today. Huge legacy, definitely. Now, if you look at the other way around, like in the bass industry, like Spotify, for instance, Spotify, they have like 10,000 employees to serve about 500 million customers, and about half of them are paid customers. So I'm not suggesting, of course, to Accenture to shift to become a kind of Spotify for tomorrow. But what is happening is that if you really want to grow your business and you know that we have this talent scarcity ahead of us, it's a good time to think about how we can improve the way we are developing the business so that it doesn't require as much manpower in order to unleash the growth potential of the company. And don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that we would replace people by bots, right? But instead, to build the product or to design products so that we don't need to even have this requirement for interaction between the customer and the vendor. And we can make some kind of seamless experience with the customer so that we can really ease the process. And of course, it is getting through automation, back-end automation, front-end automation, and even in the front-end automation, there's still a lot of possibilities to create better e-commerce experience, specifically in the B2B. There's a lack of e-commerce, of great e-commerce experience in order to ease the development and to unleash the growth of the company. That was the second trend, how we can optimize labor intensity. Third trend, we're living in a world where everything is getting faster. It's probably not a big surprise to you. The graph that you see on the left represents the time it has taken for companies to reach 1 million users in terms of days. Obviously, you probably have heard that ChatGPT is definitely the number one on the list, apart from this alternative to Twitter, that you know the story. But apart from that, ChatGPT has reached 1 million users in a matter of weeks, right? So the question that we could ask ourselves is that when you look down into the graph, you see that Netflix has reached 1 million users, but it has taken way more time. And we cannot say that Netflix is addressing a market that is lower than ChatGPT. It's probably an even bigger market in terms of targeted customer or potential population that is interested in movies. So how come that it has taken so much time in a way to Netflix as opposed to ChatGPT? Well, because the world has changed in between. Netflix was 15 years ago, and today we have created not only a world that is flat, but a world that is completely digital. Look at the number of people that are connected on the internet. 4.8 billion people are connected to the internet. There is 7.8 billion people, or close to that, sorry, that are subscribers to a mobile phone. Remember, on this planet, we have 8 billion people. So it means that there are actually more mobile phone subscribers than there are people able to use a phone on this planet, right? So, and the same with Internet of Things, 50 billion objects connected, about like 8 times more than the number of people being connected on the internet. So this has created a digital network that is making the proliferation of business way faster. And that's why all the companies that we had the chance to work with have also evolved in the way of developing new business approach. The traditional approach, the one that we had in the 80s, where we would say we need to run a pilot and then we need to limit ourselves and maybe we need to test with some customers, etc. This is over. There is new way of approaching the business, which we call effectuation, for instance, where the idea is to say, let's do it. And if it doesn't work, we will adjust. But we don't need to have this artificially slowing the development of the business. Plus, on top of that, as you know, there's 1.33 million tech startups in the world today. And guess what? 95% of those startups do not invent anything. They just solve a problem that is left by the incumbents. So the idea for the business model and the change that we want to do in our business is to figure out whether we are the target or whether we are the hunters. And of course, we all want to be the hunters. But if we really want to be the hunters, we also need to adopt this new way of driving the business with a way greater flexibility of doing things. So that was number 3. Number 4, which is somewhat the continuation of number 3, is the way we develop product. You remember this product life cycle that was very much popularized by Jeffrey Moore in his book, Crossing the Chasm, written in the 80s. It was a fabulous book to describe how the product life cycle was evolving from the early adopters to the early majority to the late majority. And then the new products would come along, and then with this same cycle and developing the same idea and with the chasm, etc. You remember all of this. This was great stories and great practices all across the industries. But now, again, we are seeing a new way of driving the business. The way we call it is that we would not even talk about a product. We are building contribution to the customer. And those contribution keeps evolving as they go. It's not anymore a new product. It's like a product that keeps evolving. You see that very well in the IT industry, of course, like we are using today, Microsoft 365. And this is the same product that we've been using over the last 3 years, maybe, or even more. But actually, this is not really the same product as it was 3 years ago, because there's been a lot of different features and a lot of new possibilities that have been introduced inside the product. But this is not unique to the IT industry. In the automotive industry, Mercedes has introduced a car that actually has the power to unleash some new capabilities as you go. So you buy a car, but later on, if you want that car to be more powerful, you can unleash and maybe subscribe to additional capacity of this vehicle so that the car is growing. So we build a product that has a potential to change over time. And it is very true with what we see with Tesla and other vehicles as well. So this behavior somewhat is proliferating across all the industries and is changing the way we are managing the product life cycle. We are not talking about those static product life cycle. We talk about a dynamic product life cycle with all the things around that, which is leading us to the next trend. What is all the meaning around this? It's basically to take a customer, let's call it a persona, and to lead this customer toward a success he's looking after. And success is defined as an horizon, so something that somewhat we can never reach. So you see how the things are getting connected together right now. We are building a contribution and a contribution in order to help customer becoming successfully in the future, right? So let me give you an example of Fender. Fender, this iconic guitar brand, as you know, they are selling a lot of guitars all around the world. The problem with selling guitars is that there is a learning curve that can be steep for a number of people. And the problem is that if it is too difficult, then you finally you give up and you don't use your guitar anymore. And if you don't use your guitar anymore, you're not going to buy a new guitar, obviously. So what Fender is trying to do is that they have developed a new service, and that new service is focused after beginners in guitars, where they're providing training, course development, services, etc., under a subscription model, which is helping the sort of guitarist to somewhat learn and be more comfortable and play great gigs and be successful maybe with their guitars. Uh, and when you think about this, what is I think interesting in this is the way they have been advertising this. They say we are not just building great guitars, we are building great guitarists. And that's a fantastic idea. How can we get our customer becoming better at what they do? And with this idea of customer success, we can sort of create that map for every of the persona that we are driving, either by transforming them towards some kind of product or by helping them to perform by becoming better in using some product like the guitars. So I'm starting with sort of small guitars, and then I'm going to buy an electric guitar, and then I'm going to buy any kind of sophisticated guitars like in a final world and repeat that in order to learn that. And on the way, as a provider, we are building not only the product, but the contribution toward this success, which includes all the services, all the training, all the features that we're going to build in order to help those customers becoming more and more successful. It's a great story. And when we see all these companies building the stories in the B2B, in B2C, there are thousands of examples where this new scheme of developing the business is just working fabulously. Which is, of course, leading us to the next topic. And the next topic is the pricing. It's been, I think, very much communicated that right now we are living in a world where the cost plus pricing is still prevailing. What we call the cost plus pricing is the fact that your pricing is defined by taking the cost, adding a margin, and that becomes the price, regardless of the value it generates to the customer. There is a very easy way to find out whether you're in a cost pricing, that inside an organization, you ask the salespeople what is the value that they are providing to their customer. And if they can put a number behind that value, If they are able to do so, it means maybe they are not in a cost pricing. But for most of the company, they don't know. They just figure out that the customer will find some value because otherwise they will not buy, obviously. But the price is not a factor of that value. The price is a factor of the cost. And the whole thing here is how can we get into a world where actually the price is a factor of value that we are generating. And it is even more important because if we are living into this recurring world, if we are getting into this contribution, if we are trying to get customers becoming successful, you'll see that it is increasingly hard to make a connection between the cost and the price that you are charging the customer. It's a bit like with a mobile phone, right? When you use a mobile phone, your cost as a user are varying from month to month a lot, but the price that you pay is the same every month. It's a flat rate. So, and that's the idea of how we can establish this value pricing. But the interesting thing about value pricing is that don't think that because you are shifting your business toward a subscription, you're done. You're not, because actually it could be the other way around. Like, for instance, when Adobe has decided to shift all of their software toward a subscription, many people were thinking, well, that's great way because we are going to have more freedom to use any kind of the product from the Adobe Creative Suite. And I can use that as much as I want, and I can store the data, and I have a lot of possibilities. They were getting into that because that was the way to get the freedom of using the product. Now, what's interesting is that since then, there's a new company called Affinity. And this company, that is a UK-based company, is doing very similar product that Adobe was providing. So like desktop publishing and graphic and etc. So type of product in order to offer the same features or very similar feature to the customer. But then they say, we are going to charge a one-off fee to the customer because we want to have the customer to be free from the subscription. So what is interesting is that you can play the freedom both ways. You can play the freedom and say, this is a way to, you can propose a subscription by developing this notion of freedom. And then you can do the other round, getting back to all this trend. So we see again that pricing, like the business model we were talking about earlier, is not something that is static. It is something that evolves constantly, something that we have to question, something that we have to rethink, that has to meet this purpose. The essence of what we are trying to do is to give a purpose to this contribution that we are providing to the customer and make it very profitable for us, but also extremely profitable for the customer. Which leads us to the next trend that we see right now in the industry. Well, it's not really a trend yet. It's more an emerging situation that we see right now coming across. Is that some companies, and we had the chance to work with some of them, are thinking that how we could reconcile the economic performance and the impact of the business on the environment or even on social development. So this is a process that is not completely new because it was very much popular. In the UK, there's a professor in Oxford who invented this notion of what we call the triple bottom line, which means that in order to evaluate a company, we need to evaluate his economic performance, but also his environmental performance and his social performance. And then that's a way to evaluate the company. But somewhat, it's a trade-off. So you have to somewhat mitigate your economic performance with the fact that you need to provide something that is good for the environment. And we see that is not really working. Look at the way bio product has been developed over the last year. Uh, bioproducts in general are a little more expensive than non-bio product. And when cost of living has increased, most of the customers have taken over or left this notion of bioproduct to come back to something that maybe is less bio, but is cheaper. So if we are not reconciling these ideas of trying to align the performance, the economic performance, and the environmental performance, we are going to have a situation where it's going to be always a trade-off. And because it's a trade-off, it's not necessarily going to work very well. The main idea that we try to work with those companies is how we can not simply have an or between all of these elements, but an and. So what we mean by that is how we can reconcile something that is going to create more profit and be more sustainable, and maybe having a social benefit attached to that. So this is the notion of the and. Let me give you an example, like in the automotive industry. If we are promoting, let's say, an automotive as a service, like Porsche is doing that, right? So at Porsche and in Paris, we have city scoot, and in many cities, you have also this kind of scooters as well, are shared as a service. You are developing something where it's sustainably better because you are sharing the same vehicle among a very large number of customers. But at the same time, the customer lifetime value of the service that you are providing is much higher. So you're developing something that is more profitable at the same time as something that is good for the environment. And there's many other examples along those lines that are sharing this main idea. We believe this is becoming a more and more trendy situation, even though we haven't solved all the pieces of the equation, but there's still a lot of work to do in order to reconcile all of these parameters. These were the 7 sort of new or trends that we see in the work that we've done with those thousands of companies over the last 5 years. And bear with me that we accept to be challenged, and we'd like to have this conversation continuing over the community that we are operating in order to leave you the possibility to maybe add more trends on and share some of the things that you've seen as well that you believe is important. Before we wrap up, I would like also to share how we are translating that in our own business. Like we, as Lemon Operations, we are a service company. All right, so many companies are qualifying ourselves as a consulting company. We don't like to be qualified as a consulting company. We like to be qualified as a business company. And what is the difference is that actually we try to really help, well, we're not trying, we are actually helping companies to transform their business model or to adjust their business model or to increment their business model by implementing something that is a digital business model. But the way we try to do that is that we're trying to come up with preset of business model, something that is almost ready to use. And that includes the value prop, the business model, the go-to-market, the operations, and with all the things around in terms of digital assets, organization, processes, and roadmap. You may want to think of us versus consulting company like you would think of a ready-to-wear versus tailor-made. Where tailor-made is extraordinarily expensive and takes a lot of time, we've seen in all these trends that actually it's not something that companies are looking after. They're looking at something that is way more agile, something that they can implement in a faster way, something that is more affordable, something that is at the reach not only of the very high, large companies, but something that a small and medium-sized business can implement as well. And something that is also leaving them the possibility to stand out. When we say that we come up with preset model, it doesn't mean that companies cannot differentiate anymore. It's like when you buy a suit, you can still have a lot of choice, and you still have the possibility to define the difference that is going to stand out versus others. So there's a lot of possibility using this kind of business model to stand out and do something that is going to help those companies to win. Plus, because those preset model have been built based on experience that we have with so many companies, we have much more chance to make it successful and to save the risk of errors. When we've worked with thousands of companies, there's still a possibility for making errors, but you can imagine that it's probably less risk than when we are trying to build something specifically for one company. So this is the way we as a service company, and if you are a service company, you may find some inspiration in the way we drive things. If we try to implement those new way of driving the business within our own company. So I know it's frustrating when we are managing a webinar like this one because we don't have the possibility to interact as much. We're going to leave the left of the time for question and answers. But we want to, again, remind you of this possibility of joining us inside the Business Model Champion community. So for those of you who were not there at this beginning of this webinar, it's very easy to join. You go into the lemonoperations.com website, and then you enter your email. And then, bingo, you're part of the community. And then there's two levels. Maybe you just want simply to be informed of the event that we're going to run on a regular basis and try to add as much value as we can, and that's absolutely fine. Or if you want to go further and have the possibility to exchange with others from different industries, from the same industry, you can join the Discord community. The link is, you will get the link as soon as you will become a business model champion. So, and then you can interact. You can interact between each other. The only thing that we are asking is that don't try to promote any kind of service or product inside that community. We will moderate that community to make sure this is not happening. We just want to have this community as a genuine way to exchange on ideas, something where we share this passion on how to drive the business moving forward. That's the intent of this community. With this, so we are almost close to the end of this webinar. So thank you so much for attending today. I suppose we still have the time to answer some questions.